Ahoy, everyone. My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every miniseries, we chart a course through the full filmography of an underdiscussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently embedded in the films of Karyn Kusama, and today we take to the streets of Bregna for her second film, Aeon Flux, and find out just how sick we all are. Nick, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Doing well. Excited to talk about Aeon Flux, which I don't think is something that any person has ever said.
Yep, you've coined a term there, a phrase, because literally I remember when this movie came out, and then I remember what happened to it, and I don't think anyone's given it any thought until we have just now. So we're really dredging something up from the depths of early 2000s film history here.
We definitely are. I say that no one's ever said that about the film Aeon Flux. Plenty of people love the animated shorts and then series of Aeon Flux. So
I would consider myself one of those people. So I've been meaning to ask you for the longest time, what is your relationship with that show? Because I loved that show when I was a kid.
So I think my relationship with it is similar to a lot of people our age's relationship to it who aren't people who like immerse themselves in it, which was I watched MTV all the time. I thought liquid television looked really cool. So I would watch liquid television, and I thought the Aeon Flux shorts obviously stood out above all the rest because that's why it got its own series, right? Its own independent series after it. But if I could tell you anything about it other than the way it looked, the fly landing in her eye in the opening credits, and sort of the way she looked, I couldn't tell you anything about it, right? That's all I have in my head is just some style points and not really much of anything else. So you were a big fan?
I was a big fan. I didn't get it because nobody got it. It was pretty incomprehensible. And so is this movie, but in a very, very different way.
Yes.
But I was young enough at the time where I was like, if I really give this a lot of thought and like maybe if I grow up a little bit, like this is all going to click into place and make sense. And I kind of liked that about it, right? Like it was very sci-fi, which I always liked. It also has like kind of a spy movie vibe about it. And I love that stuff. And I always figured, and maybe this is not true and maybe, you know, it is completely nonsensical, but it always felt like there was something more intelligent, you know, something that I just wasn't getting yet. And I liked that kind of media when I was a kid. You know, we're talking about like mid 90s, like early 90s, mid 90s,
early 90s, mid 90s, early 90s for when they were doing the shorts. Yeah. Like I think 91, 92 or something like that. And I think 93, 94 or something like that for the series. I think the actual 30-minute episodes of Aeon Flux. Yeah, I mean, again, we were pretty young, right, when it was airing. We were so,
and I think that made it seem a lot cooler than maybe it actually was. Yes. But I was all, you know, I was a little hipster, and I just anything like that. And you know, my friends would watch that. Look, I don't get it. Like, well, you're not thinking closely enough about what's going on here. And like, you know, I would kind of like try to explain it and talk like I understood it, and like this is all going somewhere. And the fact that she keeps dying and coming back to life, like that's all gonna mean something. And I don't know if it ever did, but I remember at the time thinking like, this is cool. This is this is punk rock. I really like it. And, you know, I think you could have made at some point a very good movie about that show.
I mean, it was hella 90s. Like if you just want to like, it's one of those, I think, timepieces for the 90s and that sort of heavy metal aesthetic, you know, that this like, animation doesn't have to be for kids. It can be for cool teenagers and adults.
The Beavis and Butthead era, and that's one of my favorite things that's ever existed in any form of media. So,
But Beavis and Butthead, much more understandable for someone who's 9 years old.
Sure. Well, Beavis and Butthead was for the people, you know. Eon Flux was the hipster show. Beavis and Butthead was for everyone.
So yeah, that was mostly right. That's my memory of Eon Flux. It was like a cultural sort of social thing because a lot of my friends, like you said, were also kind of entranced by whatever it was. None of us understood it, you know, but it was like, look how cool this looks, you know? So that was the thing about it. Right. And we, you know, the show, it's created by Peter Chung for Liquid Television. And then obviously they decided to develop it into a movie. Right. It goes through a lot of script, iterations and stuff, but Phil Hay and Matt and Freddie end up doing the script that goes for the movie. And they're sort of the linchpin of this because they have a lot of quotes in the stories that, you know, you'll read about this movie and what happened. They wrote Crazy Beautiful that Kirsten Dunst, Jay Hernandez movie that came out in like 2000, 2001, I think, somewhere around that, which is secretly like a science fiction sort of, movie, basically.
It is?
Yes.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, yes, it is. It's not a good movie. It's not a good movie.
That makes it sound more interesting than what I thought it was, though.
Yeah. So they're selling the movie at Paramount, right? But let's talk about what Kusama is doing, because what last time we talked to Kusama, talking about Girl Fight, this kind of not financially, but breakout sort of indie sensation. She goes to Sundance and she wins the grand jury prize, and she wins the directing award. She is still the only person to ever do that, right? And so you would assume, right? Okay, that's 2000. Here comes the next movie.
Here comes Kusama. Yep.
Yeah. Here she comes. We've got some quotes.
And we talked about this a little bit last episode.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry to interrupt you there, but
please.
like, this is the era. Like, she is catching that last wave of that indie thing that's happening in the 90s. I mean, this is very, very early 2000s. So basically, the game is still being played the way it was in the 90s, right? And a lot of those directors, they make that Sundance film. It gets purchased for a lot of money. It generally doesn't make a ton of money in the box office, but yeah, like your ticket's punched there, right? You get to go to Hollywood and make a bigger movie that still kind of has your stamp on it. And like it happens for like basically everyone but Karyn Kusama for some reason.
Well, I think we know the reason.
Yeah, I was getting to that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know you were. She's a female director, which is not like the common denominator. All the people you're talking about mostly is they're men, right? And even
they are.
Some of them have. You have ones like Christopher Nolan, right? Who we're not talking about Following, which is basically like an unreal. It's not even a movie that has a presence in theaters, but his first really American theatrical movie, Memento, does well at the box office, and then his ticket's kind of punched, right?
Yeah.
From then on,
and then Following gets a re-release, and people start seeing that. Actually, I remember as soon as I could rent that movie, I was like, I gotta watch the thing that led to Memento, right?
Yeah, but then there are other people, people like Richard Linklater, people like that. Their movies don't do anything. They come out in the movie theaters, nobody sees them, but they get to keep making movies, right? Because like there's something interesting about this person, right? So they get to keep making stuff. Kusama said after the success of Girl Fight, says it's pretty gratifying to spend so long to make your first film and then feel like it got a lot of love. That was an incredible feeling, but there's something very distorting about that much attention. It felt like a double-edged sword, she said. As much as people said, oh, we want to work with you, what's your next project? It was also coupled quite frequently, and this came with the press as much as anything, with the rhetorical question, how grateful are you that this happened? As if luck was a really huge component. Kusama said she believed that she earned at least the right to make her next film, and she had a sci-fi script she'd written about a man who begins changing into a woman against his will. So
there's a terrific BuzzFeed article. We got a lot of information for this episode because there's not a whole lot of behind the scenes stuff on Eon Flux, but reading about that script, I mean, obviously that's something that was way, way, way ahead of its time. And, the studios are basically like, no male actor wants to play a role where he is turning into a female and then gets replaced by a female actress. But apparently there is a scene in that script where literally his balls fall off and land on the floor, which I would have loved to have seen that in a movie in like 2003. I think that would have been a real game changer. And the fact that she had, I don't want to say the balls, but I guess it's probably appropriate to say it in this situation, the balls to write something like that and think, because I made Girl Fight, they're going to let me make this movie. I admire, that's chutzpah, like as much as I've ever seen it. So if I knew nothing else about Karyn Kusama, just reading that quote, reading about what she was trying to do back then, I think I'd be a fan of hers. Yeah.
She says, people said to her, you would have a lot more success making this if the guy would turn into a dog.
Which says a lot too.
Absolutely. She says, I had moments of just being like, wow, I'm kind of getting killed here, she said with a deep sigh. Like, what is legitimate success if the environment you're in feels fundamentally hostile? She said, you could essentially be autistic and be male in filmmaking, I am in some ways really attempting to really nurture my inner autistic self, but ultimately my instinct is being an antisocial woman who maybe seems like she had a chip on her shoulder, or seems like she'd been really hard to work with, or maybe seems slightly crazy. That doesn't seem like a good thing, but I feel like there's a promise that this like whiff of excitement around men who display those traits, as if there's a secret to it all. Women don't get that free pass.
Well, look at Christopher Nolan, right? He's a perfect example of that.
I mean, look at Tarantino, look at any of these guys, right? Who have outsized personalities, who all you hear about is that, not Nolan. Nolan always seems like on set, he's demanding, but a very nice guy, right? Like that is.
I mean, his ideas are audacious, not so much his personality.
Yeah, but there are all these guys who have these crazy personalities who get to keep working and working and working. And in fact, a lot of them, the only reason they stop working all the time is because they do something insane to sabotage their career. Like the guy who made Boondock Saints, stuff like that, those type of people. So she's kind of in the wilderness, right? She makes Girlfight comes in 2000. We're a couple of years later now, and she's got nothing. She's got nothing in development. She's got nothing going at all. And her agent sent her Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi's script for Aeon Flux. They said that the two of them said, we want to do the craziest version of this movie possible, something really genuinely weird. And they refashioned the elements of the story of the show, which apparently Paramount was like, we don't get it. We don't understand what this show is. She keeps dying, coming back to life to kill this guy, but she also is like lovers with this guy. We don't get it, right? So they had to kind of go in and we don't know all the conversations. We don't know if they pitched a more straightforward version of it, and Paramount was like, no, we got to change things. We don't know if they came in later and already knew that they didn't want these elements, so they came in and did these elements. Whatever they did, they changed the idea of what the base idea of it was into what they called a cerebral action romance between Aeon and Trevor, who are trapped in a closed-off society forced to perpetuate itself by cloning after a virus wipes out humanity's ability to reproduce.
Which is a pretty big spoiler, and I want to talk about that reveal that's about halfway through the movie or so later, because I think it's really important. But also, just going back a little bit, I mean, think about the studio and this project at the time. I mean, Eon Flux has been off the air for a while by this, early 2000s era, but we're in like Matrix fever mode right now. We are. Like that comes out in 99, and then the sequels were a big deal at the time, the big IMAX releases and all that stuff. Yeah. So clearly they sort of saw, if you very superficially look at the show Eon Flux, it's got some Matrix-y ideas, right? Like the Matrix is a very quintessentially 90s thing, even though it's very, very tail end of the 90s. But, the fashion sense and things like that, and the sort of techno paranoia that's in that, all of that is in Eon Flux. So I get why the studio would want to make this. I get why these writers would see this project as like an opportunity to kind of make their own Matrix. So like this project makes a lot of sense. And I do feel like there is a world where this could have been a very commercial, very successful thing. The movie that came out obviously wasn't that, but like I understand if you're an executive or you're a creative at the time looking at this property and being like this is something we need to do now. They ended up, by 2005, I think the bloom's off the rose a little bit. So by the time this actually comes out, we've lost, what did I call it? Matrix fever, Matrix mania. Yeah. We're kind of sick of that stuff at this point, mostly because that last Matrix movie is not so good. But leading up to that, I do think this is, it's a good idea. I think this is something that could be very viable.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously they're probably trying to make this movie probably for 10 years almost, right? That it's got to be the case. They probably go, okay, we've got this IP, for younger movie fans, just so you know, studios have always been crazy about this, right? They've always been, and we'll talk about this when we get a little bit farther in. They have always been obsessed with like, this is a name that people know, so obviously we should go this first before we try to do something original, because
they're making a Honeymooners movie at this time, a Bewitched movie. So like we're talking about like the early generations of television. So something from the recent past. Yeah, it makes even more sense.
Yeah. They're obsessed with IP, right? And again, they just care about the name, right? They don't care about what the thing is actually, the guts of it are, right? They care about the name. And I think movies like this, and I've been watching a lot of famous like disaster flops basically lately. I watched Peter Berg's Battleship the other day. I watched the Dungeons and Dragons movie from like 2000, but Battleship is like a core example of this whole thing, which is like Transformers was a success. And so Hasbro and Paramount once again, or is it Universal? No, I think it was Universal. I don't remember Paramount Universal. I can't remember which one it was. Are like, well, Transformers is big, so obviously the thing that people like is like movies about toys or games made into things, not like alien robots who fight each other, you know, that whole business. So they put like a Monopoly movie into production, Hungry Hippos, you know, Battleship. This is the craziness. And I want people to understand that this type of movie, and this is not laying this at Kusama's feet because we'll talk about this. Eon Flux, Battleship, these type of movies, you know, Battleship happens in 2012, so it's after Iron Man and Marvel starts to take off. But these type of decisions that Hollywood was making opened the door for Marvel to come in. That's why Marvel was able to take a foothold at a certain point, because we have to remember, you and I talk about, oh, they don't make movies like this anymore. These movies, I wish they movies, but there was a whole era of movies like this where people were just like, what the fuck are we even going to the movies for anymore? Like it's so bad. You know, I think about summers like this year the Terminator 3 came out. There was like 5 or 6 huge flops like this, like big IPs that were terrible movies. And like people were just getting tired of it, right? People were getting tired of, I got to go to a movie and it could be a disaster. And I'm just so tired of it. And that's why let Marvel come in and do what they did, right? They were like, yeah, but what if it was just all like at least a base level, like 6 and it was never a 2, you know what I mean? Sometimes it'll be a 9, you know, but like, what if it was at least always a 6? And you're like,
it's
well,
funny
that's
you're very right about that. But the age that I was at the time, I was like just out of college, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's all this blockbuster trash that's happening, and I'm not interested in any of it. But there were so many great like indie movies and you know, international films that are getting released here and that actually start doing pretty well. I mean, this is also the same year as like Brokeback Mountain, for example. It's, you know, you've got stuff like that is subversive and interesting and different and, you know, artistic, I guess, in some ways. And at the time, it was like movies are doing great. I mean, you're a couple years out from like No Country for Old Men and There Will Be
You're
Blood.
talking about movies though that, you know, can make $80 million, but they're not going to make, you know, $400 million.
But they're made on much smaller budgets than something like Battleship, right? So like for me, and I'm wrong, but like the early 2000s, you know, that whole era, I thought that was a very good time for movies because I was mostly going to see that stuff, right? Rather than bothering with these big studio idiocies like Battleship. How was Battleship? You never said.
It was bad. It was very bad.
I thought so.
I was hoping like it was going to be like secretly, oh, this is stupid and dumb and fun. I had a good time. It was just bad because I like Peter Berg as a director. You know, so I was like, so I was like, maybe this will be interesting, but it's just terrible. And we don't divert too much into this, but the funny story about Battleship was they made this deal with Hasbro where they were like, okay, we have a deal with you. We're going to produce this many movies and we have to spend this. But the part of the deal was Paramount or Universal, I can't remember. I had to spend a certain amount of money on all of these movies, and they didn't make any of them, right? But they had all. Peter Berg wanted to make like The Hunt for Red October, but he was like, but I can sort of like Trojan horse it in with Battleship because they're not going to just make a naval small scale combat movie that costs $40 million, $50 million. But if it's Battleship, they put IP out of there, let me do it. And then their deal was running out with Hasbro, and they were like, listen. We don't want to, we can't make any more movies. Your movie now has a $200 million budget and it's going to be science fiction. And they had to basically redo the whole movie right before it like launched, basically, is what happened with that movie. So much like what we're going to talk about Aeon Flux, we'll get back to that now. It is like a studio really not understanding how to handle things. It's just all money decisions, right?
Sure. Although I'm still a little disappointed they never got around to Hungry Hippos because I've been playing a lot of that lately and I feel like you maybe had something there that could have worked.
Ridley Scott was going to make a Monopoly movie. That almost happened.
Yeah, that was close. I remember that.
Yeah. And now like it's something like Barbie was this huge, massive, unbelievable hit. And they're like, well, obviously that means they want more movies about dolls. So we're going to make a Polly Pocket.
Polly Pocket gets greenlighted like immediately after that. I think Lena Dunham was attached to that. And then it's either canceled. I know she's off the project. I remember seeing that story, but like, I'm assuming the whole thing is canceled.
I don't know. And there's like a Daniel Kaluuya like Barney movie or whatever. This is what I mean. They don't understand what Barbie is successful for a certain reason, and it wasn't because it was based on a doll, right? That's not why. But like anyway, they don't understand these things, and this is the problem you're always going to run into with these big budget movies. So she gets sent the script. She says there was something really interesting there about this idea of the soul and its expression across time. She said, I think, okay, I'm not gonna get this job, but I'll just go through the motions of meeting with a studio to see what that's like. And she prepared storyboards and a presentation and all this stuff. And the writer said other directors came in and were like, we'll have Moby do some music for it. It'll be great. So when Kusama came in, they were like, holy shit, like this person is like prepared and gets it, right? So she gets the job.
Moby really dodged a bullet with this one, huh?
So there's like a year-long process of pre-production. Sherry Lansing at this point is the head of Paramount Pictures, and she liked the script. She liked Karyn Kusama. She saw, basically the writer Hay says, our collective idea was trying to make something that could stand next to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That's how everybody kind of bought in. Charlize Theron, hot off winning the Oscar for Monster, signed on to star, and then Frances McDormand, Pete Postlethwaite, Sophie Okonedo, Johnny Lee Miller is in this movie. It's got a pretty intense cast, right? They all sign on based on this script. This happens to actors all the time. They sign into a script they like, that's interesting. They probably all liked Girl Fight. They're probably like, Girl Fight's a cool movie. This is a cool director. This seems like this could be interesting, right? They sign on for it. The movie was initially budgeted at $110 million, but the studio wanted to have it. So then it ended up being like $55 million because they weren't confident in a visual effects heavy story with a female director in control and a female star. And then so the year pre-production is going, and of all accounts, it's a pretty good experience, right? For Kusama, no red flags right now. It seems like, okay, we're going. This is going to be a good thing, right? We've got a hot star. We've got, we've got a premise that we like. We got a script that we like. Let's go. And then Sherry Lansing leaves Paramount right before the movie's going to go into production. So I would say this, but Kusama says, but right before they go, she says, I feel like that this is sort of something that has been missing from sci-fi recently. It's sort of become so much about gray, dark apocalypse, and we had the opportunity to tell a story that is quite a bit brighter on the outside and darker on the inside. They're set to film in Berlin, Germany, to use like its kind of natural architecture and look for the setting of Breakout, which is also a big departure from what the show looks like. The show is very like brutalist.
Yeah.
Looking,
there's more color. There's definitely more curves in this movie. There's very few straight lines, which is really interesting. There's some really, really cool visual stuff in Eon Flux.
Yes.
I think overall, my take on this movie is not going to be a super positive one, but there are moments where I was like, wow, that is a very intriguing looking visual. That is something that I've never really seen before. And when you've seen as many movies as people like you and I have, anything new is like, well, okay, that makes me want to see more of this.
Yeah. I mean, what I'll say too is like right off the bat, before we can get farther into this, the movie is too weird for me to outright hate it, right? It's just too weird for me to be like, like I fucking throw this thing in the garbage, right? I don't have that. Like I had that feeling about Battleship, right? Which I'm just like, this is just like generic nothing, right? This Eon Flux isn't nothing. There's something in the belly of this thing that is interesting, and we'll talk about it as we go. This
doesn't look like it was made by a committee. This doesn't look like, I mean, eventually the studio really kind of grabbed the reins and took over this movie, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, it doesn't look like something that's just a straight up corporate product. There are definitely some weird subversive ideas. I mean, I wanted a movie that was 1,000 times weirder, much like the show was. I mean, to me, this never sort of approaches even close to that tone of the show that I like so much, which is this, completely inscrutable, but also, existential, philosophical spy movie, sci-fi thing with just like, made up language and things like that. Like this movie is so annoying with the way it uses a couple of words. Like if I have to hear the term monarchin one more time in this movie, I want to throw something at the screen, which I'm pretty sure that's from the show. It's been a very long time since I've seen the show, but I think that term was used in the show, and that was what this resistance group that she was part of was called. But like they say it like every 10 seconds in this movie, and it's like, that's a stupid sounding word. Stop saying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that thing is like the movie you're talking about was never going to happen, right? From Paramount in the early 2000s. It's something that like, Neon or A24 now, maybe they would do something like that, right? And like that, but that wasn't going to happen then, right? And so
there's a movie that came out last year, actually. It's an indie film shot in black and white. It's called Divinity. And I just seeing some clips and some stills from that kind of reminds me a little bit of an Eon Flux sort of sci-fi take. So I have to see it still. But
interesting.
Like there is a possibility, like, I don't know. Well, it's never going to happen now because of the 2005 Eon Flux, but I wish an interesting filmmaker could tackle that property and do something more like it should be.
They've talked about doing a show. That's been something that's been in like the hopper for a while at this point.
I didn't know that. I could see that on like an Apple TV or something.
Yeah, definitely a streaming show because that's what everything is now. But so we said that shot in Germany. There was a big accident at the beginning, and Charlize Theron like really like messed up her neck, I think it was. She said that if it had been like 1 millimeter to the other side of what happened, she would have been paralyzed, essentially. So so things sort of like have to sort of, I don't know if they shut down, but she takes a back seat. And she said that time she kind of was able to get more handle on the character. Of course, we don't know what that ever was going to look like because the movie we have now doesn't have really a character arc for her. But so the production after that went fine. But Sherry Lansing leaves Paramount and Brad Gray and Gail Berman come in. And Kusama basically goes like, okay, here's my cut of the movie. And they were like, no, like this, we do not like this. We hate this, in fact. And so they basically all but fire Kusama at this point. They go, you're gone, you're done, your hands are off. We're recutting the movie the way we want to recut it, right?
This was another really just fascinating thing that jumped out for me. That article, they did a 71-minute cut of this.
Insane.
Like this movie's incomprehensible as it is, but to cut like literally, I mean that's barely feature length. I don't recall any like big budget or even close to big budget Hollywood movie ever being that short.
No.
But what was interesting to me, they never do this, but they actually bring Kusama back in. Yeah. Like, we hate your version, but we hate what we did with it even more. So can you like help us fix it? Like, what a poison relationship there. Like, I mean, there is no way you're going to get a good movie out of a situation like that, right?
Yeah. And when they bring her back, they're like, you can come back, but we're going to have somebody watching you the entire time you're with the editor, so you don't try to put anything back in that we wanted to cut out that we didn't like. So eventually she gets back up to 91 minutes. She said, it felt like I was having open heart surgery without the painkillers, is what she said about it. She said the studio dismantled every choice she and the scriptwriters had made. The emotional core of things was always being questioned as sentimental, over romantic, short of literally anything saying the words female or feminine. Huge swatches of the storyline, which gave the movie a kind of emotional weight, were completely removed. Carefully filmed action scenes with long, deliberate takes were re-edited into a jumbled mess. The sexuality of a gay supporting character was cut out of the film completely. We just said cut it down to 71 minutes. Didn't make any sense. She came back in. She had somebody watching her. She considered removing her name from the project completely, but she was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, out of spite, abandon like everybody else or put somebody else's name on it so they take all the brunt of the thing. Like, basically, I'm not going to do that. She got it down to 93. I think the original kind of thing was like 2 hours and 15 minutes. They went 71 minutes, which is insane. And then went back up to 93 minutes, which is still really a lot out of the movie. So there was a half an hour hacked out of the movie. The original score was rejected, she said. And the job was given to Graham Revell with just 2 weeks left to where they had to lock the movie. So yeah, and then it was released on December 2nd, 2005.
It's my birthday. That is not what I did on my birthday in 2005. I'm taking you to see Aeon Flux.
It was originally a summer release, but it was delayed. The film grossed approximately $52.3 million worldwide against a production budget of $62 million. Charlize Theron had like a quote about it a couple years later. With Aeon Flux, when Aeon Flux came to me, I thought that could be something. I was never really completely sold on the entire concept, but I really loved Karen Kusama's movie Girl Fight, so I threw myself into that with the belief that she's a great filmmaker, and then we effed it up. Theron said with a laugh, I just don't think we really knew how to execute it, and it's disappointing, but it happens. I've been in this business long enough to know that you cannot get it right every time.
I think that's fascinating also, right? It's almost like a she said thing where I like to listen to Kusama or to read her comments on this. It sounds like she might have had a good movie there, right? Her 2 hour and 15-minute version of this that, she had very carefully planned out. She's bringing storyboards to the pitch meeting. She has this particular concept for it where she wants to really draw the emotions out of this very cold and emotionless sort of property. Certainly, if she shot fight scenes in long take, there is not a single thing that approaches a long take in this movie. The fights are cut to they basically threw these scenes in a Cuisinart and hit puree, and it's just like random flashes of nothingness. There is not a single fight scene that I think even looks good in this movie. And I remember taking that note when I was watching it. I was like, who the hell edited this? And has anyone ever seen an action movie before? Like, sometimes you let a shot breathe a little bit, right? So you can kind of see where people people are in relation to other people. So according to Kusama, and I like her style, now that I've seen Girl Fight, now that I've read some quotes from her, like I tend to sort of think that maybe she did have something here and the studio just kind of hacked it to pieces. According to Charlize Theron, like that didn't happen at all. Like nobody knew what they were doing, and this was kind of doomed from the start. And it might have been an ambitious failure, but this was never going to be a good movie. So I think that's kind of interesting. The two of them have never worked together again. I don't know,
but I mean, Kusama's only made like 3 more movies, and they've all been tight,
sure.
since then. So it's not really a thing. I mean, I think there's a dual thing here, right? I will say this. I'm always a little bit wary of the director who comes out and says, and not that I don't think they actually believe this, but go like, the version you saw is terrible. If you just saw my version, it would be great. I feel like sometimes the desire to see the unseen object builds it up in your mind much more than the reality, right? It's the thing I always say is, I remember when they did The Exorcist at the beginning, the Paul Schrader movie, they took it away from him. They brought Rennie Harlan in, and he like reshot some of it and re-edited it and put it out. And it was like, a 6 or whatever. But like, then they're like, but everyone at that time in like film culture was like, I just want to see the Schrader movie. The Schrader movie is going to be amazing. And they put the Schrader movie out, and it was terrible. The Schrader movie sucked, So I'm always wary of this. I will say this. I think whatever it was probably a much more interesting movie, but a much more functional movie, right?
Well, I guess maybe that's what I mean. But according to Charlize, that's not even true of the. But who knows
what cut of the movie she ever saw? She might not have seen anything except the 93-minute cut. Theron won an Oscar, but Theron was not who she is now, right? Which is a much more established, sort of reliable box office and powerful screen presence. Yeah. Right. Monster was a surprise, right?
Pretty hot at the time, though, right? Coming off of that, and like she is doing like big budget movies at that time, and she is a recognizable. She's a name. She's an A-list person and a household name. But
she's not a producer on a movie, right? She's not shepherding the concept from beginning to end. She's not seeing cuts of the movie. Who knows if she saw the 93-minute cut and was like, this sucks, whatever. Who knows, right? Also actors have a lot more sort of like, constant sort of imaging to do, right, with their lives, right? Charlize Theron needs to be like, yeah, that movie was bad, because like she needs people not to think about that movie as something that is part of her like core filmography, right? She needs to be looking to the future always, and
she can't just shit talk the studio because she's potentially going to work with that studio again. So throw Karen Kusama under the bus. I don't know. I'm Team Kusama in the. This rivalry that's not really a rivalry.
I don't think it's a rivalry at all.
No one talked about it.
Yeah, she didn't say bad about Kusama. She just said the movie didn't work.
No, but there's a difference of opinion there that I think is interesting. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And so, right, the movie comes out. It's a failure, commercially and critically, and anybody who sees it doesn't really like it. And that's where we are. So there's a couple more points I want to get to once we're done, because that's going to lead into when we go into the next episode. But so overall, we kind of been going into a little bit. I think we were texting a little bit while we were watching the movie.
Well, I texted you because I think the first 15 minutes or so of this are just interminable. And I was like, it was the first time since we started doing the show where it's like, I'm not sure if I want to do this. Like, I have to now finish this movie and talk about it. And I was just not on board for that. Like, I was bored and stultified and just like, there was nothing I liked about it. And then you texted me back, like, well, I can tell you something, like, it doesn't get a lot better, but it gets better. And I actually think you're 100% right. Like, this movie does get a little better as it goes on. There's a very interesting twist that, like, it reminds me a little bit, oddly enough, of Joseph Kosinski's Oblivion, which we talked about a ways ago. It's different from that. It's not the exact same development, the same reveal that happens. But like, once we get that, and once Eon and Trevor start to spend more time on screen together, there were points where I was almost like, I kind of like this. Like, this is okay. I want to see how this all turns out. I won't say the end result was good, and there's some things about it. Like, I think the thing that burned my ass the most in the first 15 minutes is, here's Frances McDormand, who is like literally one of the greatest living actors. She's one of my favorites. She is a known commodity at the time too. We're just about 10 years after Fargo here. And so she's like royalty, and she is awful in this movie. It is like one of the worst performances I've ever seen from an actor of that caliber. And sure, you know, she's just kind of phoning it in. I mean, she probably understood right from the get-go that this was not going to be a memorable, notable role for her. But like, she's actively bad in a way that because Pete Postlethwaite, which is a very tough name to pronounce.
Yeah.
He's a great actor too, you know, almost on the level of her. And he's not good in this, but he's at least trying.
He's interesting. Pete Postlethwaite is never not interesting, right?
Yeah. Well, and up until I saw this movie, I thought Frances McDormand, there's no possible way that she can't be interesting. She is very much uninteresting in this movie.
Well, she's given, you know, she's got real Judi Dench and Chronicles of Riddick vibes going on.
I even liked that performance better.
Well, that movie, that's a much better movie than this.
It's a great comparison, but yeah.
Sure. But I'm saying a similar vibe, right? This like sort of like storied, you know, lauded actress showing up in this thing. But I mean, this is a nothing role, right? This is the thing too, is like there's a meet in the middle between like what a role gives an actor and what they perform on it, right? And I don't think there's any universe where with this role any actor is any good in it, right? And the problem with McDormand, right, is that, and we talked about this when we were talking about Oblivion, again, to bring Oblivion back again, is that there are certain actors who are good at selling just bullshit, right? Who are just like, I can say all the bullshit. Either they're classically trained British actors who are just good at doing anything because they're just like, look, I take the material and I do it and I'll bring my thing to it. Or they're people who've just done a million genre things who just know how to do it, right?
And sometimes have fun with it, chew the scenery and make something of it.
Like Michael Sheen in Tron Legacy, again, to bring it back. We've talked about already, right?
I get to play David Bowie. This is going to be fun.
Exactly.
She doesn't look like she's having any fun. Like, I feel bad for her the whole time.
I mean, one of the things that I think is wrong with the movie, and again, who knows how much of this is because it was cut to shit, right? And messed with so much. The movie's tone really, like, I think dooms it almost from the start, which is it is just so self-serious when what is happening on screen is so ridiculous,
absolutely,
that it just never jives. And it's, again, this is this era, right, where people take the wrong lessons from stuff like The Matrix, you know, and The Matrix is actually a pretty funny movie, like when, you know, and is arch in a lot of ways. And this movie is just not arch. It takes itself so seriously. It fits into that like Ultraviolet, you know, this whole vibe of movies that Equilibrium, this whole vibe of movies that were coming out. I was just going to
mention Equilibrium, sure.
In this window where the studios are still obsessed with The Matrix and what they try to do, this serious world we're going to create where it's like kind of techno and cool and, you know, all this kind of stuff. They're going to wear black and it's going to be neat, you know, all this kind of stuff. They just don't know how to execute it right. And it's so serious. And I'm sure if there was more, we talk about the first 15 minutes are just atrocious because you can feel that that's where most of the stuff was cut out of the movie, right?
Yeah, a lot of exposition, a lot of voiceover. Like we set up the world in the clunkiest possible way, like with just talking over some nice looking scenery.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the movies, and I never say this, but like, you can even tell the extras have no idea what to do in this movie. They are giving bad performances too, and they're just like walking down a street. You know, they're not doing anything that you couldn't do in real life. It's not weird science fiction stuff. So that's a problem. You know, you can kind of feel the incomprehensibility and the fakeness of this, like right from the opening moments.
It gives real like early thousands like TV vibe a lot of the time sometimes, you know,
like something that would be on the WB or
the Sci-Fi Channel, you know, where it's like we are not Battlestar Galactica, which was actually great at using a budget and creating something that felt real and tactile and all this kind of stuff. The stuff where it's big scale, I'll say in quotes big scale, it just doesn't have that feeling, right? It feels like TV. It feels like we're an episode of Alias and we're in the wherever place, you know, like that's what it feels like. So
I did see this compared to Alias in a couple of reviews.
I could see why.
Was on at the time. Yeah.
Yes, it was definitely on at the time. It was very influential and big at the time, which I'm sure probably was a little bit of this, right? That's going on at the moment too. But so yeah, because like there's all this stuff like with the sister and like the year between when the sister dies and when she goes on the mission that sort of takes the second half of the, not the second half of the movie, the bulk of the movie. She's like, I haven't been a person in a year or whatever. And it's like, we didn't see any of this.
Yeah.
She died, they came back. And also the sister is not really set up. And the performance is terrible. The performance of like the husband of the sister is terrible. And like, I think it's because we're just not seeing any of the guts of the scenes, right? They're just cut to the bone. And another common thing about these big flops, like Battleship, like the Dungeons and Dragons movie, they all do the thing at the beginning where they're like, this is the world, and here's a bunch of text that we're going to tell you what the world is, and then we're also going to have voiceover that tells you what the world is, right? Where it's like, if you're starting your movie out like this and you're not like the Lord of the Rings, like you are in trouble, right? Your movie is in deep trouble for the most part.
Absolutely. And it's really, you see right away the clash between the tone of this movie and the show. And, you know, not that Eon Flux, the MTV series, is the greatest thing ever made. But one of the things that I think was great about it was it did have cool action scenes and all that stuff. But like, you knew basically nothing about this world. And that's what made it interesting. It was like, and I'm talking way out of school here, I've never played a Souls game or Elden Ring or anything like that.
I played all of them, so I can tell you.
Okay, well, fine. Then you can tell me how wrong I am. But my understanding of those games is there's a lot of lore. There's a very interesting world that they're set in, but it does not spoon feed you any of it.
No.
You sort of see things and you discover things, and it's just like a glimpse out of the corner of your eye, and you can piece together the world from that. And that's one of the things, again, that I really loved about the show, Eon Flux, is that, you know, I thought there was a lot more going on there, whether there was or there wasn't. But this movie, like, immediately, it kind of gives you everything, and then we are supposed to care about this character and her sister, like this very conventional Hollywood movie relationship. Like, I really care about my sister, and my sister got murdered, and now I'm just out for revenge. And it's like, don't do that plot in this movie, right? Like, there's like a tie-in book to the Eon Flux series. I remember, I think the title of it was like the Hephaestus Plague or something like that. And like, I don't know what that was, but that sounded like, you know, I remember just sort of hearing about that. And the plot of that was some weird, unusual thing that, you know, gave Eon Flux a reason for doing what she did, but it wasn't that sort of very standard, oh, a family member of mine was killed and now I'm hell-bent on revenge, and that is going to put me in contact and in conflict with the rulers of this dystopian world or something. Like, it just, I don't know, like right off the bat, this movie was like, okay, so we're just going to do the simplest, easiest thing possible. We're not going to develop these relationships at all. And one of the things I loved about the character Eon Flux is that she was cold-hearted. She was just, you know, ice water in her veins. Like, she didn't love anybody. If she did, she loved Trevor Goodchild, who was her like arch nemesis, which they sort of do in this movie. But
yes.
Then they turn out to be like, no, this is a real deal, like heartfelt, emotional relationship these characters have. And, you know, I don't think there was anything heartfelt in the show Eon Flux. And, you know, that feels like studio interference.
Well, I mean, in the scripting phase, that they already threw all that stuff out, right? So the movie is the movie, and we can't penalize, right? Like, I think just constantly comparing it to the show is not going to do us any favors. Like, there's plenty to criticize about this movie other than just comparing it to the show.
That's not what I'm trying to do, but it's like, you had that element in the show, and like, so if you're going to take this in a completely different direction, like, you either have to go for it, which it sounds like the writers wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's take this cold sort of, you know, very dystopian, icy sort of thing and give it a warm beating human heart. That could be very interesting. But it's like, this movie kind of tries to do both, right? Like, I never care about any character in the 90 whatever minutes of this movie, and there's just no reason to, and their motivations are that, but like, they are not set up at all. So it's like, I think you either could have done a much colder movie, a much more clinical sort of movie, or you could have made this, you know, like, and I think that could have been really interesting too, right? Like, let's see what actually makes Eon Flux tick. And it just kind of, it tries to have it both ways, and it's completely unable to do that. I mean, that's maybe what Charlize Theron was talking about too.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I will say too, this is the part of the movie where I feel like it's most hacked up, right? That I feel like we're skipping well, this in the fight scenes,
but sure, yeah.
Of stuff. Well, yes, but I mean, that's just like editing problems. That's like editing. Like,
we're talking about complete sequences that are
that's what I mean. I'm talking about, like, you're just like chop.
You feel the loss.
Chop,
yeah.
chop.
Yeah.
Like, we're getting this out of here. And, you know, and again, the structure of the movie as well, my guess would be a huge thing that studios do when they have problems with movies, or they feel like the movie is going to be too confusing, is they come in and say, okay, put a bunch of voiceover and stuff at the beginning so people know where they are, right? Even movies that we love, right? Like Blade Runner, right? That's one of the things that you got to put voiceover in it, because I don't know what the hell's going on in this movie. And that's what they're coming in and telling them to do here, right? Is to do that. So who knows what, again, we can only talk about what got printed to the movie that came out, right? We can't talk about a movie that doesn't exist, right? But you can feel it here. Anyone who's watched a lot of movies, assembled a story ever in their life, can tell that there are huge chunks of things missing here, right? I will say, I think that like the visuals, the first time we see that pool with all their spying pool or whatever the hell.
I like that. Yeah, with the little drops in
really
the pool.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, as I said, there's some very interesting visual ideas. The airship that flies above the city that Pete Postlethwaite lives in. That's really cool looking. It's like a jellyfish. That's an interesting image. That's something that I've never really seen before. And Charlize Theron looks great in this movie.
Oh my God.
She's
amazing,
she's beautiful, but like the costuming is great. The physicality of her performance I really like a lot. She is. It's not exactly, it's not that bony, angular, bony, I think is the best word you could use to describe cartoon Eon Flux. And Charlize Theron is thin, but she's not bony, right? She looks healthier than cartoon Eon Flux. But it's an interesting looking character. She does play it with a lot of, muscle and weight. The movie is not very weighty, but she feels, I don't want to say real, but I don't know. She does feel like she's embodying this character in an interesting way, in a substantial sort of way.
She's an excellent physical performer, right? She's really good. There's a reason why she's become sort of like an action movie staple later in her career, right? With Fury Road and The Old Guard and Atomic Blonde, stuff like that. She's good at this stuff.
I love Atomic Blonde.
It's a cool movie.
Aside, sure.
It's a cool movie. She's very good at that kind of stuff. I think she falls short. And again, there's a lot that goes on here with far as what's been cut out, what the sort of mapping of the movie is. If she never fully understood what her character was and the journey, I think in some of the line delivery, she's a little flat. And again, she had this problem a lot more in this era of her career, right? Which is why Monster was such a surprise when she was so good in it, because her sort of the albatross around her neck before that was she's unbelievably gorgeous, but she's not a great actress. So that was kind of people don't remember this because it's crazy to think about that now, right? Where she is one of the people you think of and you're like, what if I wanted a famous person to be in my movie who was really good to lend it credibility? Charlize Theron is one of those people,
Yes,
but
it could get.
But back then that was not the case. She was the pretty face who played a lot of girlfriends, who played a lot of all this kind of stuff at this point in her career. So yeah, so I think that sequence when she's in that pulling looked cool. All around it we got a lot of nothing. Right? We got a lot of terrible, we got the Frances McDormand scene. We've got the stuff with the sister who's I'm pregnant and it's gonna be great. And then she opens the door. She's you're late or you're early. And then there's a gun goes boo 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 during the day. And then all of a sudden it's night again. And there's a lot of weird editing choices, right, that are going on here. You can tell there was a lot of interference. What's fascinating though is I feel right after this, they go your mission is to go kill Trevor, right? And this is when we first meet Trevor as well. We meet Trevor and we meet his brother, who's what's his name?
Johnny Lee Miller.
Yeah, I know his name. I know that Oren is his name.
There we go. Okay.
Johnny Lee Miller, who is hamming it up in the worst way in this movie. He's one of those performances where I'm just dude, you don't know what movie you're in. You don't know what you're doing. I can appreciate. So I watched the Dungeons and Dragons movie, right? Jeremy Irons is in that movie. And it would have been very easy for Jeremy Irons to be I know this is terrible. I'm just going to phone it in. But Jeremy Irons knows exactly what movie he's in. He's not looking down on it. And he's just there to fucking ham it up. He's the one really kind of shining thing, or the good thing about that movie. Johnny Lee Miller has that vibe where he's I know this movie is bad. He's I'm not going to put in an effort. I'm just going to for the most part, and be stereotypically slimy. I really thought he was very bad in this movie.
Yeah. And definitely put a lot of that at his feet. I feel Karen Kusama's direction to him was do villain stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows, right? But
I will say, talking about other performers, Martin Zaukas.
Yes.
He's very good in this. I actually like him as Trevor Goodchild. And I think when him and Eon Flux are, as I said, when they're together on screen, this movie kind of comes to life a little bit.
A little bit. He's kind of Dime Store Dominic West, right? Who's the guy in The Wire?
So yeah, I thought he was fine. He's one of the highlights of this movie.
He's fine. Again, I think they have some pretty interesting chemistry together.
They do, but it's a weirdly unsexy movie. I mean,
it is, except when they try to make it sexy. It's so weird because you have like one of the sexiest people in the world at the time as the center of it, you know? So it's weird that it's not a sexy movie.
It's very chasey. Like I was wondering, and I think this a lot of times about movies, like who is this really for? Like this feels like it's made for 13-year-olds. It's a PG-13 movie and kind of is that in every way in terms of the violence and the sexuality and stuff. But, you know, the show was subversive, and not to keep going back to the show, but I do think, you know, there is a version of this that kind of pushes the envelope a little bit. Like this could have been a bloodier movie. There could have been, you know, hotter sex scenes in this with Charlize Theron and Martin Scorsese that might have been interesting. Like, not that we always need that in a movie, but I feel like for this particular property, for this idea, and especially if you're gonna go a more sort of humane, sensual sort of route with it, you probably would have wanted that. But this movie feels very, you know, it's the PG-13iest PG-13 movie I think I've ever seen.
For sure. It's one of those things where, like, you know, like I said, it's really self-serious, but it would have done well with a little bit more nastiness to it. Because the show is kind of nasty, right?
It was. It had a little bit of grit to it that this doesn't have at all. Like all the rough edges are sanded off.
Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that I think when I get most sort of annoyed with. I'm not a stickler for like, well, you didn't do the plot exactly the same. Like, I don't care about that kind of stuff. But like, you should get the vibe. That's the most important thing to me when you're adapting it. Get the vibe, get this, like the heart of it right, the soul of it right.
Agreed.
And you can change the details around all you want. Like, I don't care that the elves show up at Helm's Deep in Two Towers, because it's cool and like it fits with what they're doing in the movie, but it fits with the vibe of the soul of sort of like the story. So like, I don't care about the details like that, but it's missing sort of, because I think most people remember about the show is the vibe, right? Is like the vibe of the show. And this movie doesn't have that vibe. So why would, when you went to see it, like you said, who's it for? People remember Aeon Flux and they go see this, like, this is not recognizable as Aeon Flux to me. And then anybody who doesn't know Aeon Flux at all is like, is this thing, you know? So we should talk about the tree vaginas shooting poison darts at,
again, interesting visual.
Yeah. At Sophie Okonedo's hands or whatever, or hand, no.
Oh God.
Hand feet.
Feet, yes.
Hand feet.
What a waste of Sophie Okonedo.
I know. Coming right, Hotel Rwanda, I think, is right. It's right out. That's why she's in this movie, is because she did Hotel Rwanda. They're like, oh, big pop. Like, let's get all these, like, you know, these, like, whatever. I'm sure she's like, okay, my next step, supporting actress nomination in Hotel Rwanda. Now I do a big studio movie, and then my career, and then really she's had not much of a career after this, which is crazy.
I wonder at what point in the process she learned that her character is going to have hand feet.
Which, listen to me, I don't have a problem with it in like a general, like, at least is like you said, it's like, I've never seen it before, you know? And I could get but like, this feels a little bit grody and weird. Like, that feels a little Aeon Fluxy to me.
It does, although they don't use it for anything. Like, she should be like flipping around doing all kinds of crazy cool acrobatics. Yeah. Like, if you have hand feet, like, use the hand feet. But
yes,
she kind of just like lands on the ground. A couple of times she just lands softly on it, and I was like, you could do that with feet.
Yeah, she does the thing where she does a swing on a tree with it. At least she
maybe once, yeah.
And she does like that where she like grabs a ledge when she throws her, like she gets flipped off a ledge of a building and she grabs like the ledge with her feet or whatever. But this action scene, right? First of all, I think is cut terribly, right? This is where you can really feel like they were just like cut.
Every single one of them is cut terribly, but yes, yeah.
Some cool concepts. I do like the visual when Charlize Theron is like spider crawling on the ground. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that was in the trailer. I do remember seeing a trailer for this movie. There's a couple of clips from this scene where she lands on the grass. The grass is like spiked
blades.
Yeah, like that's a cool visual too, but we barely get to see it. I certainly believe Karen Kusama when she says I shot these action sequences a very different way and the studio just cut them to pieces, because you could kind of see how this would play out in sort of a more cerebral long take sort of way that might have looked really interesting.
I mean, we talked about this with Girl Fight last time, right? Which is like, she was really good at shooting those, they're fight sequences. They're not like action sequences, but long takes.
Yeah, the
really
POV
good geography,
and the ring, that stuff was fantastic.
Yeah. Like really smart about that kind of stuff. And you can see it in some areas in this,
very brief
very
glimpses
briefly.
of it, yes, but like this is not her rhythm. This is not how she shoots action scenes, and I thought that from the like, you know, I guess I assumed it was that the studio just kind of took this from her and edited the way they wanted, but you know, I like maybe it could have been she went into this and like, okay, I'm making a big budget Hollywood sci-fi movie now. I got to cut this more like The Matrix. I got to shoot this more like The Matrix. I love the idea. I mean, again, going back to that article, like the writers of this are talking, like, we want to make this Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is a movie that has so many of those beautiful slow motion long take shots in the fight scenes, and this has none of that. Like, I love when people make a terrible movie like this and they compare it to like all-time great artistic feats like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I feel like that happens all the time.
It does. It happens all the time. We really wanted to make this like The Sting, you know.
This terrible superhero movie is going to be the touch of evil of its generation.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing I'll say too is I think in this actually especially, you can feel like the budget being cut so much because it's just two people way out in the open. There's no other people in the scene. There's no really like the whole defenses of this like compound of the leaders of the entire like world.
Yeah, it's all automatic. You don't have a lot of guards here. They don't, even those scenes I was talking about before, those terrible extras, there's not that many extras. Like Regna does not feel like a very well populated place, which kind of makes sense in context of the story. But yeah, the world feels very empty here. And I agree with that too. I mean, the vagina coconuts that shoot projectiles, I'm making it sound more interesting than it is.
No, definitely. You're making it sound more interesting than it actually is.
Because this is about where I was ready to check out. And I was like, could we maybe just like not do this whole series and do somebody else? Because I don't want to finish this movie. And like, I like Karyn Kusama. I've seen The Invitation. I think it's great. I can't wait to see Destroyer. But I hit a point here where it's like, you know what? I think we got to go back to the drawing board here. I'm glad I stuck it out because there were some things I liked later on. But this was the scene where I was like, okay, I can't do it anymore. I needed your moral support. And you gave it to me. And I gave it to you. Honestly, very honestly, you were right. It does get better from here.
And this is one of the things too, where I guess they didn't reshoot anything. I guess that wasn't part of like the thing, but some of like this scene, everything just feels like the lighting is so flat. It just, everything feels so flat. I'm like, maybe it's a color grading thing, maybe, you know, whatever it might be, but like, it just feels very hollow and empty, this scene. Right. And then once they're inside the facility, I think the movie becomes much more interesting, right? And visually, it becomes much more interesting. Like I think the light, like especially the lighting, I think becomes a lot more alluring, a lot more dramatic lighting.
Well, you're right about that. I mean, I didn't think of it this way until now, but yeah, the exterior scenes in this movie look atrocious. And the interiors, not all great, but like some of them are very interesting. I like the sets that they have. I like the sort of, you know, the geometry of the sets. I think that is really interesting looking. Almost has like an expressionist silent film sort of quality, like Germany. So sure. Yeah. But yeah, like that might be the distinction, right? Like when we're outside, everything looks like shit. Everything looks like a CW series. And when we're inside, we've got a little bit of like visual flair that this movie so badly needs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'll say this, like, so we get so she's on this mission, right, to kill Trevor. His administration, right, killed their sister. She blames him because everyone thinks of him as like this like despot or what have you. Surprise, the twist,
kind of fascist imagery.
Yeah, the twist is like he's really not. He's kind of just like a science dude, and it's like his brother and sort of like this like shadow group of people who are really doing all of this really terrible stuff. He doesn't know what's happening. You know, it's like this whole thing. They really try to rehabilitate him in a big way so that I accept the romance between them, I guess. But I think that...
Well, it does the Oblivion thing, right? Where he sees her,
so much like Oblivion.
There's an opportunity for him to kill her, and when they lock eyes the first time, I've been waiting for. I forget what the line exactly is, but like he sees her face, and it's like, oh no, I can't kill her. I love her, and like we've known each other much longer than you realize. That kind of thing. Yeah. And what that all turns out to be, and I think it's revealed a little after that initial moment where they meet. But I actually, as I said, I like that twist. It's an interesting science fiction idea for a more interesting science fiction film than this. But the idea is that there was a plague, and to save humanity from this plague, they've continued cloning these same people over and over and over again. They are starting to kind of get their memories. You know, there's like this genetic memory that's starting to affect people's minds. So everyone's starting to go a little bit crazy. And basically, rather than have any new people born into this society, because what's the reason for, I don't even remember why
they can't figure it out. They can't, apparently they can't, everyone's sterile. That's the problem. Everyone's, they can't, so they have to like implant basically babies like in like they put it in like the water or whatever, and then
right, and it's the same people over and over and over again. So like everyone has lived multiple lives. Like that's a really interesting, you know, that feels like that like heady, like trippy 60s sci-fi novel kind of idea that could be very interesting in a movie like this. It's barely, I mean, it's such a good idea that the movie could spend some time on, and it never does. Like it's kind of just like established there, and it's like, okay, let's do action stuff again, which is boring.
Yeah, for the most part. I think that like you can, again, more of this stuff's already cut in the beginning, right? There's that little hints of like, you see the old people like looking at the young people and crying. Yeah. And then you realize, okay, that's because they're seeing like their wife or whatever, like reborn, you know, as a young person. But they don't spend any time on it in the beginning because that's all cut to the bone. So I'm sure that's part of what it is. And this seems like the thing that Kusama was the most interested in, right? That quote was sort of like about that, right? Yeah. It's sort of like that genetic memory idea. Souls persist over time. Right? Yeah.
If the body dies, the soul stays in some sense.
Yeah. That's the thing that she was most sort of focused on. And they have like, this isn't like what we kind of understand scientifically now. It's like if you were cloned, it wouldn't be like you were reborn. It would be a different person. You know, you would still die, right? But in this, they kind of into like, she kind of says that thing about like, we're meant to die. If we don't die, there's no purpose or whatever. So there is like idea that, you know, this is like the same person, like being reborn and reborn and reborn and reborn.
And it's very interesting, like the sort of philosophical existential idea that like that's what they need is to die and for new people to take their place, right? Because that's how, you know, life is supposed to work. And that's a big idea for a very silly looking PG-13 sci-fi movie like this. Like once that happened, I was like, okay, like my mind is sort of engaged now. And, you know, the movie did everything in its power to shut that off.
Yeah, it did.
After it did that reveal. But I was like, that's kind of cool. I want to think more about that.
Yeah. And then I think, so she goes there to kill him. He's doing some sort of like practicing like a speech. Like he's doing like a TED talk or whatever. He's practicing his TED talk. And, you know, the Trev talk. And then she's about to kill him and they touch, or she sees him and then she has these memories and she kind of like passes out or whatever. And he puts her in prison.
That's right. I'm sorry. She gets the drop on him. She has the opportunity to kill him first, and then he has the opportunity to kill her, and neither one of them takes the shot.
And they have like this sort of like, you know, she's like in this like glass prison thing, and they kind of talk, and you know, he's kind of like, you don't understand what's really going on, you know, typical like this type of movie stuff, right? Meanwhile, like this is, I think, around the time you learn that Johnny Lee Miller is like the kind of like their counsel is sort of like, he's making a big mistake. Why didn't he kill her? Like, this is crazy. He's staying alive. He's like, I'm not going to listen to any criticisms, you know, of my brother. You can't. And then like the next scene, you learn that like he wants to take out the brother because the brother trying to
usurp the throne so they can continue.
Well, basically, the brother wants to like
where they are immortal, basically, and they will continue living through history as the royal family or whatever. I guess you know, one thing I would have liked this movie to do, and the show certainly did this, was like once we reveal in this that Trevor Goodchild is actually like a good guy. There's never any question as to his intentions. Like, there's never a moment where it's like, wait, is he really just playing her? Could he be bad? Like, would he double cross her again? Like, you never get that. And I think that would be, again, because this is based on a property that is heavily indebted to like the spy movie tradition, you know, double agents, who's playing who, that could have been really interesting. Maybe that would be in the Kusama cut. Release the Kusama cut. But like, I kind of was expecting that and didn't get that. And it's like, oh, okay, so they're just in love and they're going to save the world. And that's kind of where we're going from here. And
so he wants to
not the most exciting thing.
No, he basically wants to like, they're trying to do this. They're trying to cure this disease or whatever, or this like infertility, and it can't happen. So he kind of wants to go out there and be like, look, this is the truth about what's going on. And the brother doesn't want it because he wants to rule forever as his eternal king or whatever, right?
Yeah. And he's
like, why would you do that? Like, we have a cool life, man. Like, that's basically what he's telling him.
Yeah, which I do sort of get.
I get it, yeah. Like, just be a little nicer to people or whatever. Like, I don't know. But the brother knows, like, I mean, what's his name? Trevor knows, like, there's a shelf life, right? We're all going to go insane. It can't last, essentially. She figures this out, you know, when they have, right, kind of like right around the time they have like they have their love scene or whatever. Well, this time too, we get this thing where...
Which we don't see any of, by the way. We cut to them in bed together, and it's like, oh, yeah. I guess we should imply what happened there. Which we can, of course. I'm not looking for full frontal X-rated stuff here, but I feel like the show would have pushed the boundary in that scene.
For sure.
Because it's the only remotely sexy moment in this entire movie.
Yeah. And then we have like this moment where, you know, she runs into, you know, I don't forget, did she run into Sophie Oquendo again, or did she go into her mind palace and talk to Frances McDormand? One of those things happens, and then there's this like insane, weird, like existential game of telephone that happens where basically
telepathically the Monacans, the Monacans
like are all connected, and they're like,
their mission is now to exterminate Aeon Flux.
Yeah.
And then there's the other character with the sawed-off Gatling gun, which is kind of cool looking, but kind of used.
She's like Johnny Lee Miller's like person, whatever.
Yeah, she's got this adorable little short Gatling gun, which I've never seen that before. So I'll give it that.
This is, I mean, not necessarily the editing pace of it, but this is the one action scene coming up, which I feel like has some juice, which is this idea that like Trevor's lab is like sort of like in this like side dimension. I don't know what I want to call it. You know, like that, like she kind of like does this thing and she kind of goes to like a portal.
Yeah, it's like virtual reality or something.
I think they're moving between some sort of like location or states or something, because like they fight between them, right? And she's able to come in and out, and they're like kind of trying to catch each other, like coming in and out. This is what's I was like, this is kind of cool. First of all, the set is awesome. The look of the set. This is one I think interiors of is really working with. The interior looks really nice. The lighting is great.
His office is very cool. Reminded me again a lot of Joseph Kosinski films. Like I was thinking Spiderhead in this moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Though, like, again, doesn't feel like, why is there this like Architect's Digest thing happening in the middle of this like action movie? Like, this is a weird, like, you know, really designed area. So I think it fits pretty nicely. And this was the one action where I was like, okay, like I'm on board for this is a cool concept for an action scene. You know, always looking for that in action scenes. Like, what's your hook? Right? It's not just people punching each other. What's the
shooting
hook?
At each other? Sure. Yeah. There's got to be like something that's sort of driving it.
Exactly. And, you know, great directors, they'll always have they're always trying to have something, right? They're always trying to think about what the thing can be here, right? Like, and even in like mediocre movies, if you get a good action scene, it's something that you can remember, right? Like the Marvel movie came out, the classically like failure of a Marvel movie, you know, the one really true failure, like financial Marvel movie, has a really kind of amazing action sequence in it where, because in that movie, every time they use their powers, they swap places. So it's just actually where they're all just like swapping places in a crazy amount of like while they're using their powers. And it creates like cool situations. And this kind of reminded me of that, because like they're flipping in between and they're trying to judge like, okay, if I come in out of this portal and do this at this time, they're going to show up here at this time. And I liked the sort of the idea behind that scene. I think it's the least hacked up action scene in the movie.
It is. Basically. I wouldn't say the execution's great.
No, it's not great, but it was interesting is what I would say. And that's what I was hoping. That's what I think the movie at its best probably would have been overall, right? Is an interesting movie. Interesting failure, maybe, or interesting middling type of thing.
Well, right. And I think you really kind of nail it. Like every other action scene after this is just people punching each other, firing automatic weapons at each other. It's very like they're not taking advantage of this world or the physicality of this character, like really at all.
No. And there's not really much memorable about it really at all. You know, like that's the thing is like from this to the end, it's other than when she goes into the ship where like the ship turns out to be right where they store all of the genetic like material of all the people. And that's where Pete Postlethwaite is. that's the only scene really left in the movie that is memorable to me. Because
agreed.
The set is fantastic, right? It's the one time where there are characters delivering and accepting information, and I think it's actually engrossing what they're talking about and
like
what they're saying.
Literally meets her maker in that scene. And I love the idea that, you know, she's there to kill him and he's like totally okay with that. Like I always think that's an interesting thing in a movie, right? Like it's this assassination mission and the target's just like, all right, like, let me tell you some stuff and then you do what you want. I think that's always kind of a nice little twist on things. And, you know, he's this frail old man and she is this like very in shape, very powerful character. I really like that. Although when she's dangling from the tentacles of it in some of the worst green screen I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
It really kind of blows whatever was cool in that moment. But up to that point, I really do like that sequence a lot.
Yeah. I remember too, like, this is like an era where like where everybody is trying to hit above their weight as far as like what they can do with CGI and compositing. We actually kind of reached that era again now, which is just so maddening, right? Where I felt like for like 10 years we figured it out and I was like, okay, we're good now. And I feel like this is that era where things often looked shitty, you know, where you would like just be like holding your breath, like to see like when is the really shitty thing going to happen that's going to take me out of whatever scene I'm watching, right? And when it didn't happen, it was like a shock, right?
And at least in 2005 you could somewhat blame it on the technology. Now there's nothing to blame it on, just you know, lack of effort or lack of time.
Well, now it's because they're just like well, we'll just there's now I think it's more of an issue of intentionality, right? Where they're just like, they tell the directors like, don't worry about the CGI action stuff, we'll take care of that, you just worry about the scenes and then we'll just sort of like design this thing, and you get on set and just shoot them running on a nothing and then we'll just throw things in there, you know. And it's like that I think is what
I saw some clips of Borderlands last night and I'm never going to see that movie, but that is exactly what Borderlands looks like.
You know, it could still be, you get good directors with good, you know, with intentionality, it's still things look great now and look even better than ever now. But then even when they had intentionality, things would look crappy because of stuff like this, you know? And there's no excuse necessarily in things like this because, like, at least when you're like the Wachowskis, you're like, well, they were really trying to do shit that no one had ever done before, right? This is just a person on a green screen swinging from a rope, you know? And it's like, okay, you should be able to composite them into a scene and it looked fine.
Too bad, because one of the things I loved about the world of the show was the verticality of it. Like, you know, she was always like climbing stuff and jumping off, you know, Assassin's Creed type acrobatics. And there's really not too much of that in this movie. And this is a scene where you really could have done a lot of that. And it turns out to be, you know, kind of underwhelming when they actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my memory of the show, right, is like it's very like, you know, Spider-Man 2099, like crazy, you know, like
she was always jumping off of stuff.
Yes, again, a big vibe of the 90s was that type of thing for sure, you know. But I feel like, again, that scene is memorable because it looks great. You got two actors, you know, doing a good job with each other, and like I like that her concept is like we talked about, like the sort of existential concept of like, we can't avoid this. Like everybody, obviously every human being wants to avoid it in some way, is scared of it. It does, you know, all of this stuff, but there's a reason we're not more important than the order of nature and the universe, right? We're not more important than that. As much as our brains try to make us feel like we're more important than that. We're not, right? So we've got, you know, this loop we're doing obviously isn't working. We need to break it. The thing I don't understand, right, from a script perspective at this point, is that Trevor at this point is like, but like, we're all gonna die then. And I'm like, was that your thing before? Was that the reason why Johnny Lee Miller is trying to kill you? Is like, you know, like you were sort of against the way things were anyway. And now when somebody else is like, we gotta do it, you're kind of pushing against it. It just felt like they needed somebody in the scene with her to sort of be like the counterweight, because Johnny Lee Miller was like just too insane. So they're never gonna have a scene together where they talked about like big ideas, because there was no big idea of Johnny Lee Miller other than I just want to be the king, right there. That was all that was there. So I feel like obviously with a lot of problems with scripting, that's one of the things at the end. And honestly, like at the end, they do just like the search video, like everyone's like, yay, we're all gonna die now. You know, that's kind of like what the thing is.
It could be a very interesting ending because it's not a particularly happy ending. Like there is a resolution there, but it's again this very dark sort of nihilistic, almost Gen X idea, right? That like, you know, death is the solution. Like, cool. Like, tell me more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and look, other movies have done this much better. Obviously, there are movies that talk about these big sort of things in this way. This movie had, like, this way I said, despite this movie, I can't hate this movie though, because it has these things under the surface that
I feel just that idea alone. Like, I got to the end of this and I was like, I didn't like it, but I didn't hate it, and I'm glad I saw it. And I, like, I like big swings, and that idea is a big swing. It's not executed particularly well, and they don't really do a whole lot with it. But like, there's a lot of terrible, like, I kept thinking about, I confused this movie and the live action Scarlett Johansson Ghost in the Shell.
Right. Yes.
Which is, very kind of similar world, a similar look in some sense. And I'll never see that movie because I think the original, I'm not a huge anime guy, but I've seen Ghost in the Shell and I absolutely love it. And the ideas are big and the visuals are really cool looking. And there's just so many things about it that just make that the classic that it is. And, my impression of the Hollywood live action remake is like, let's learn, like you said about this one, all the wrong lessons from that and just make another generic superhero action movie out of that. But, like this one, it's not like ripping off the property that it's based on, and it is trying to sort of actually have an interesting idea at the center of it. And I like that, I like that attempt.
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's one of these things too, where it's like you bring an interest, like for instance, the Ghost in the Shell movie is directed by Rupert Sanders, right? Who's the guy who directed Snow White and the Huntsman. Like, it's just like that Crow remake that just came out like this year.
Yeah.
He got the Russian roulette stopped on him for that fucking remake that they tried to make for 15 years or whatever. Him and Bill Skarsgård. But, he's not I don't want to speak ill of a person, but he's not a real director. He's a guy you bring in who just makes like these sort of like, you're going to get a 5.5 or below from him.
But he can handle a big budget. He probably comes in under budget and he gets along with the studio. And, here's a large budget movie that nobody's really going to like very much. Like, throw it to Rupert Sanders for sure.
Yeah. Kusama is a real director.
She's a real director. Yeah. She's coming off a very good indie film.
Yeah. I mean, from all the interviews that we were reading with her now and all the things she said, she's got like the personality and the outlook of a real ass director who wants to make real choices and do real stuff, right? And you can tell by the quotes before this movie came out, or about her feelings before the movie was coming out and why she signed on to it, that she had an idea, she had a vision. And this always happens with studios. They think that they don't like the vision when it comes, and they think they can somehow, Edward Scissorhands it into something that will be successful, even if people don't love it, right?
But unfortunately, their vision of success is like something that was successful before. Like, let's just make it more like that.
Exactly. But that's what I mean is like there's usually never an example of them coming in and doing this and the movie being a hit or a success or liked at all. Whereas a movie like this, I guarantee you that if this movie had come out with her original vision at her original running time, I don't think it would have been success when it came out. I think it would have failed, just like this failed. I'm not saying it would have done well, but I'm telling you, in the year of our Lord 2024, there would be a group of people who were like, you know what, Aeon Flux kind of
this would be a cult classic.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially, I'm imagining like her version of it, like it's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon meets Alejandro Jodorowsky. Like it's a very sort of quiet movie that has these bursts of sex and violence, and I don't know, like and
maybe it's not great. But at least
no. But it's it's a midnight stoner movie kind of thing.
Exactly,
like it is a cult classic in some sense.
Yeah, like there are plenty of movies that are like that you can watch now that were unsuccessful when they came out. You watch and you're like, there's something about this thing.
Well, we've had the Southland Tales conversation.
Yes, Southland is one of those movies. It's like at least it's Richard Kelly's movie. At least like you can't say anything about that. Like it is a weird ass movie that does weird ass stuff. Does it all work? No. But there are some genius level shit
I will defend that thing to the death. And I really did. Like, there was a part of me that thought maybe Eon Flux is kind of like that too. And people just didn't understand it at the time. And that's definitely not my final impression of it. But you could see like little, very sort of vague glimpses of that watching this.
Where something like Ghost in the Shell, right, is never going to be that, right? It's just never going to be that type of movie. I think something that you could hope for is like, I haven't seen it, but the way people talk about it, that Alita Battle Angel movie that came out a few years ago, the Robert Rodriguez movie, people liked that movie. People were like, it was a failure when it came out. People kind of like ignored it because she had the giant eyes, and people were like, this looks weird. And now you hear people are like, there's cool stuff about that movie. You should see that movie. It's interesting. That's what you want. That's your best case scenario when you're in this type of situation. And studios often get in the way of that and destroy it because they think that if they make it 90 minutes and they put a sexy person on the poster and it's a name you kind of know, at least maybe you'll be tricked in the first weekend in going to see it and they can get back their money. Like, that's really all they're thinking about. They're not thinking about the long-term life of the movie, the health of the movie, what it could mean, right? And again, which I'll say, this is another thing that as critical as you can be of Marvel and Feige in particular, that is not the way he operates, right? That's not, no. Everything is about what is the long-term vision of what this movie fits into, and what does it mean for our whole thing, right? He is always thinking about, like, what does this mean 7 years from now? Sometimes that hurts them, right? But also, I think it keeps like a certain vision going on, whether you like it or not. Through the whole thing, there's a care going on, right? Whether it's successful or not, whether it always works. And here, like that just doesn't exist, right? It's just, get this shit out the door. Like, I don't want to think about it anymore. That is basically what this is.
It does feel very unloved by pretty much everyone involved. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, and one of the things that her agent said to her after this movie came out and was so hated, they said that you're in movie jail now, until they're kind of like laughingly. And she says, maybe it's supposed to sound like a rite of passage, but so few women get any opportunity to have more than just the rite of passage, which is a big part, I think, of what we really need to be talking about when it comes to women.
And then she gives this list of perfect examples of male directors who made a flop like this, and then, immediately got to make like another movie that turned out to be great.
Exactly. And we were talking about this, right? When you and I were concepting the show, part of the idea was exactly this, which was that there are directors like Karen Kusama who get a bite at the apple, it doesn't work out, and unlike a lot of male counterparts, they don't get another chance to do a movie like this. And again, this is 5 years, comes out 5 years after Girl Fight, and then we've got another 3 years before Jennifer's Body comes out after this. And after that, it is 7 years until The Invitation comes out or something like that. I think it's something crazy like that, right? She's doing TV, but she never goes away, right? She's directing TV, she's doing stuff, she's still working, but her promising movie career is pretty much a thing of the past at this point.
Yeah. I do like that one of the screenwriters of this, they got together while this movie was being made, and they are married. I think they're still married, because I like, not knowing any of that stuff when I watched this, I was just looking at the writing credits. I was like, who are these guys? And I realized I knew this movie was a total flop, but like, oh, she worked with them like 2 more times after this. Like, why would she want to work with the writers of Eon Flux again? And I guess maybe part of the reason for that is that she's married and in love with one of them. So
right, but she also loved the script, the original script, right?
Yeah, that was before. Sure.
She said like she loved the script, and so that wasn't any part of the problem for her, right? Was that sort of situation?
No, I just would have thought it would have been kind of a poisoned, why would you work with someone who was involved with this project? But, I guess if they have a relationship outside of the movie industry, then that sort of makes sense.
Yeah. So like, and she mentioned Aronofsky, Nolan, Soderbergh, Linkletter, right? Are people who, their first efforts were nothing, right? And they at least got a second bite at the apple, and it didn't.
Well, and even like Aronofsky made The Fountain, which I think is a great movie that everyone hated and made zero money. And he came back and, became Darren Aronofsky.
Which is oddly like one of my favorite of his movies.
The Fountain?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're a defender of it. I love it.
I'm a defender of The Fountain too.
Yeah.
Again, another movie that deals with sort of what we're talking about with.
It does. And another movie that was supposed to have a huge budget that was cut, like, I think even more than in half.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a very similar situation.
Yeah, very, very similar situation. And what she says, finishing that quote, is she says, of what we really need to be talking about when it comes to women's careers in film, it's the sense that each movie represents some kind of finality, potentially, to their career, as opposed to the sense of you have hits and you have misses. That's called being an artist. I'm very conscious of how frequently great artists in films who are male and who are also generally called big personalities get to fail. So, yeah.
Like, and I feel like you could interpret that statement as like a little bit of a sour grapes thing, but she's actually right?
She's
Like,
right.
you know,
yeah.
you don't have to like it. It sounds like, you know, it's just a good, like, sort of feminist soundbite.
Yeah.
But like, you look at the example she gives and it's like, oh yeah, she's onto something here, right? Like, that is not just her griping because this movie went very poorly and was a bad experience for her and, you know, kind of prevented her from working again. Like, she's absolutely on target there. Like, this doesn't feel like she's just mad just to be mad. It feels like she's mad and she's got the receipts to back it up.
Sometimes you can be mad and be grousing and still be right. You
know
what I mean? Like, that's basically the truth.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I mean, she definitely, if you just saw the quote and you didn't like look a little bit deeper into it, you think, okay, well, like, I guess I would probably say the same thing if I was her. But she says it and like she kind of knows her stuff. And I definitely agree with her.
Yeah. I mean, look at, like, you know, just you can look at, if we talk about the most successful female directors, even like Catherine Bigelow, right? Suffered a similarly same fate until The Hurt Locker. Right after she made Strange Days, which was I think a great movie, but a huge flop, flop. One of the biggest flops you could possibly make. She's going to make another movie for 7 years, basically, and when she makes the movie, it's K-19 The Widowmaker, which is another huge flop, and then she's going to make another movie for another 7 years. And that's this is a person who made Point Break. Yeah. She has proven that she can make
Near Dark.
Yes, I'm talking about like
amazing movie. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Point Break is a giant hit, right? I know you like to talk about like and I agree with you, like the quality of the movie should really matter. But to these people who give the money to these people, all they care about is how much money did your movie make for the most part. That's really all they care about. So we're talking about this happens to a lot, and I'm sure we'll talk about more of these directors as we go along. But this is a miss. But it should have just been a blip, right? You made a great movie, you made a bad movie, and maybe if Jennifer's Body is a big hit, then she has a different career. But and we'll talk about this when we talk about Jennifer's Body. I feel like if Jennifer's Body is a hit, I feel like all we get is maybe one other Kusama movie. So, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think she becomes, often working director at that point in her career,
Well, I think if Jennifer's Body is a hit, she gets pigeonholed as a horror director, and that's all she gets to do is like female-led horror movies. And like,
for sure.
How many times can you go back to that well? Because that's another thing studios like to do, right? It's like when you have a successful thing and you seem to be good at that thing, it's like, well, just keep doing that. Keep doing, over and over and over again until you get, it's like a band that records basically the same album, 100 times. And so I guess in some sense it kind of worked out for Karen Kusama that these two movies back to back didn't go the way she wanted, and that she kind of do things that were more interesting to her. And we'll talk about The Invitation because I think it's a really interesting movie written by the writers of Eon Flux. So I guess there's a redemptive arc for those guys too.
Yeah, and we get to talk about fake Tom Hardy when we talk about The Invitation. Right, Logan Marshall Green is in that movie, right? I think he is.
It's been a while. I can't wait to see it. I remember really, really liking that movie. And
yes, he's in The Invitation. Yes, Logan Marshall Green's in The Invitation. But we have Jennifer's Body next time to talk about, which you haven't seen it since it released, right? Yeah. So I'm very interested to have that conversation with you because I have a feeling that you're gonna dig it. I don't know if you're gonna love it.
First time. No, I was never like, I know a lot of people really didn't like that movie. And I think everybody I saw it with, like my wife being one of those people, this was before we were married, but we went to see it with some friends and I was the only one who liked it at all. But like, I mostly liked it and nobody else did. But my taste is so much better than I should say that. But like, I wanted it to be me that liked that movie and I did.
Right. We get to talk about Diablo Cody next week, which I'm also excited to do that as well.
I love her. Yeah, she's great.
Because she's like a kind of an auteur in her own way, you know?
Yeah, another very strong female personality. And you had to think that could go multiple ways, right? Like that could have been the greatest thing ever. That could have also been a total disaster. It's neither of those things. But, that sort of clash of egos that could have happened there, I don't know, should have been maybe more interesting than it turned out to be.
Yeah. I think, and again, I think also we'll talk about at that point with Cody as well, little bit her like stock is also dropping a little bit at that point. Like I think people are starting to get a little tired of her. in that moment. Oops, I turned that back on for some reason. In that moment, so I think that we'll talk about that as well. Quickly, I just want to tell you what the box office was for that weekend that we're talking about. The weekend that Aeon Flux opened. Can you guess where in the top 5 it opened, Nick? What do you think, if you had to guess? I'll tell you the number. It opened to $12 million.
And that was in the top 5?
Yes.
Can't be higher than 4, right?
It is actually number 2.
Really?
Because nothing else opened that weekend.
In the post-Thanksgiving release?
Yes.
Wow, that's surprising.
Because what happened the week before was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which it's grossing. Sorry, it's in its third weekend of release. Sorry, at this point, and it's still number 1. It grosses $19.8 million. It's grossed a total of $229 million in 3 weeks. That's its number 1. Aeon Flux is number 2. And then really the rest of the top 10 is full of movies that have been out for a couple of weeks. Some like Oscar plays, some just like, end of the year stuff. Like we've got Walk the Line at number 3. A movie we will definitely talk about at some point because that's a James Mangold picture.
Sure. Yeah.
Love that movie as well. Yours, Mine, and Ours is in its second weekend. Just Friends is at number 5 that weekend. Its second weekend. We got Chris Columbus's Rent, which also might be a movie we talk about at some point. The Disney just absolute shit show Chicken Little, which made money, but it's just a terrible movie.
I like Chicken Little. I don't remember much about it. I
watch
remember
it again.
Okay. I'm probably not going to do that.
No, don't watch it again. The Joe Wright Pride and Prejudice is out right now in theaters. It's adding theaters.
Are we going to do Joe Wright?
I think we're definitely going to do Joe Wright.
Okay, I like Joe Wright. Great.
Derailed and In the Mix. That's our top 10. I don't remember what In the Mix is.
That's got Usher in it.
Is it? Is it Usher in it?
I think it's a
Look
musical.
Look at you, Nick.
Yeah. I was going to mention this before. So at the time, from late 2004 to like mid 2006, I have the greatest job in the world out of college. I worked for a local arts and entertainment weekly. It's
nice.
They used to have those. Like we actually printed on paper, and you could go to this. Like a Village Voice type thing in New Haven, comparable to, at the time, the New Haven Advocate. And so one of my jobs, one of the things I loved, I ran the movie section and the music section, but, of course, movie stuff I always wanted to write about. So I was previewing movies. We would do, because we came out on a Wednesday, so I'd write up a little preview for whatever the big theatrical release was coming out on that Friday. And I definitely remember Eon Flux, movies from this period kind of, I have this affinity for them or this connection to them, stuff like In the Mix, that no one's thought about in however many years. Cause I remember I had to research it and write about it. And I definitely remember, when Eon Flux came across my desk and I was like, I really used to like that show and I have zero interest in seeing this movie. And I wrote the thing and I mostly just wrote about how much I loved the show. And I don't remember saying too much. It's oh yeah, it's the director of Girl Fight and Charlize Theron is in it and it's not looking so great. I think I don't remember. I want to say this did not screen for critics. Remember they used to do that. They would do
they still do that sometimes.
Yeah, no, they still do that. But it was real big, right around that time where it's you could tell the movie was going to be a piece of shit because they just newspaper reviews were a big thing back then. And I was lucky enough to work in that field for a while. But I think this was one of those movies where nope, we're not letting anybody see this. We'll go on word of mouth, and we know that word of mouth is going to be bad. But I'm surprised they landed number 2 at the box office. Yeah,
well, nothing else open. What were you seeing? It was your birthday weekend. What were you seeing?
Walk the Line.
Probably.
Actually, I think I actually saw that on my birthday in 2005.
Okay. Nice. It's a good film.
It is, yeah.
It is a good film. I like that movie a lot.
Me too. And not just because I'm a big Johnny Cash fan. It's just a genuinely good movie.
Favorite music biopics, probably, because I like the way it's structured a lot more than most of them. I don't like Cradle to the Grave biopics so much, and that movie does that a little bit, but it more focuses on a certain their relationship.
Well, it's the June Carter Cash, Johnny Cash relationship that kind of drives it. I mean, there's a little cradle to grave stuff. And we see his brother. And, I'm glad they did that because then we got Walk Hard a few years later that beautifully parodied that.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Very funny movie.
Another that's a movie, giant failure at the time. A pretty disliked movie when it came out.
It was, but I was there day one. I was so excited for that movie, and it lived up to my expectations.
And now it's a movie that people really like, that people think about very fondly, and they're like, wow, this movie. And now everyone in that movie is like super famous now. So everyone's like, even the little parts are now super famous. We're like, I can't believe that this movie has all these people in it, you know? Where I was interning at ABC News when that movie came out. Because
what a fun world we lived in back then. What a great time to be, just out of college, like somebody our age. Like there were so many cool jobs available. I feel like that doesn't exist much anymore.
I don't know if it does anymore, but I met Jerry Seinfeld at that time because he was coming to promote the Bee Movie.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Half of that is cool.
Half of that is cool. That's when I also met Francis Ford Coppola at that time. Yeah, he was. The guy who ran like the entertainment division. He comes up to me and he goes, he would somebody send out to pick up, like people would come to they would come for interviews or whatever, and someone have to go down. I was an intern, so you go down, and you pick him up, and you bring him up, right? He knew I was a huge movie guy, and he comes to me, he goes, Bobby, can you go downstairs? I need you to bring Francis up. And I was like, what? I had an elevator ride with Francis Ford Coppola. And it was I was so nervous. I was so fucking nervous. There is it could have been any super famous actor and I would have not been half as nervous as I was with Francis Ford Coppola.
No, I totally feel you on that. I've said many times, like if I could meet one like famous director, it would be him. And, when people ask like, what would you ask him? I was like, I wouldn't ask him anything. I would literally just hug him and walk away. Like that
thing to do.
I'd say thank you or something like that, but feel like I'd have nothing to say to him and I wouldn't need him to say anything. I've read so many interviews and everything. I just want to embrace that man. So,
well, maybe judging by the reports of his reports of his behavior on set of Megalopolis, maybe he'd be fine with it.
I'm not a beautiful 22-year-old female, but
I had this idea. I was like, in my head, I was like, you know what I should do? I'm sure everyone's like, oh my God, you changed, you're so influential on me, like your movies. I was like, in my head, I was like, maybe I should neg him. I should be like, so Jack, what's up with that? But I think this was right around the time that Tetro, was that the movie he put, that really crazy experimental movie he put out?
I think that was a little bit later. Yeah.
When was that? Tetro was 2009. No, this was right on the time. 2009.
Okay. All right.
I think he was there to promote Tetro, which.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Twixt, which I haven't seen. I like Tetro.
Not a great job promoting it because it didn't make any money, but he was there for that. That was cool. I had to transcribe a lot of interviews by hand. He'd be like, I interviewed Helen Mirren yesterday. Can you just type it up? And I'm like, this is the worst. But my job mostly was I mostly worked with this one person who was a producer on one of those morning, it was ABC News Now. So it was when they were trying to do internet stuff. It was that time where everyone's like, we got to do an internet thing, where we put out internet only content on our website.
Yeah. I worked at a newspaper at the time. So that was what we did.
So they launched this whole thing. It was a whole shingle or whatever. I worked with this one producer. She would always do the morning, celebrity, kind of gossip show or whatever, and so I would write the little intro. I could write the little intro thing, little pithy intro thing that they would do at the beginning. And so I have to research stories and look up stories and run them by her. It was a cool experience, to do it. But the coolest thing about working there was they have a database of everything that's ever been on television ever, basically. And you just at this time, it wasn't even all digitized, but they had just started really all digitizing it. And you could go on this log into this thing and just type in anything, basically. And you would get a bunch of hits and you could watch all these clips from the history of television, basically. It was nuts to be able to do that.
The analog to digital sort of that little gray area that we had there. But again, it was a fun time to be kind of in that industry and in the field neat. And the stuff that was happening was interesting. And young people like us, which I guess we're not anymore, but at the time we were supposed to kind of take that to the next level. The older people, they didn't want anything to do with anything digital. So we had this opportunity to do stuff in that format that was, pretty innovative at the time. Now looks so fucking archaic.
Yeah, the one senior guy I talked to one day, we were talking about, and he was like, listen, he was like, do you know how many tapes are in the library? Do you know how many machines we have? How many editing bays ABC has that they've had for how long? Do you know how much money it costs to convert? Because you can't convert one, you got to convert all of it at the same time. He's like, that's millions and millions and millions of dollars. So that's why they don't do it, But it was a fascinating time. It was a very interesting time to be working there. I think I was trying to pad it out a little bit because we didn't talk that much about the movie. We only did, I wanted to get us a little bit of time
we
in there.
Covered a lot of ground, I feel
no,
like.
we covered the whole
like,
movie. I just want people, when people look at the episode, I don't want people to be like, why is it an hour and 20 minutes long when most of them are 2 hours plus? I think about this stuff, Nick. I think about this stuff in my head. So
no, I'm with you, but like, I think we did justice to Eon Flux.
We did. No, we did. Absolutely. So yeah, next time we're talking about Jennifer's body, and then after the invitation, and then Destroyer, and then we'll have a Kusama bonus episode where we talk about Yellow Jackets and maybe some of her other TV work, or maybe some of her shorts. We'll define it more as we get closer. Definitely, we're gonna watch the pilot of Yellow Jackets. She just did that short in that collection of shorts that came out that was released I think 2 years ago or something like that. So there's a couple things we'll kind of map it out, and then after that we'll go into our new director, who we haven't even decided if that's going to be yet. So once we are getting close, we'll announce that, and we might have some bonus extra episodes in here. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you go to intrepidfilmographers.substack.com, you can kind of find everything that we do there. You can subscribe to the podcast there. You can sign up for the newsletter where you get the kind of the show. When the show comes out, we'll send you the email automatically. All this kind of stuff. Whatever videos or articles we're putting up, that's how you'll find them. So find us over there. But until next time, thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Bobby.
And thank you to everybody who is listening. Until next time, be good to one another. Later.